Hello and welcome. My name is Rick Byros. I'm the Content Director and founder of Food Safety Tech, and I will be your host and moderator for today's Food Safety Supply Chain virtual event, underwritten by both SGS and Trustwell. Today's event will consist of two 30-minute presentations, starting with FSMA 204 Explained, and then FSMA 204 Insights from Chick-fil-A, the journey to compliance. After the presentations, we will conclude with an expert panel question and answer session. During the webinar, you will have the opportunity to participate with interactive polls, which we encourage you to participate in. You will also have the opportunity to ask questions, and we will hold all the questions for today's presenters until the question and answer discussion panel. To submit text questions to today's presenters, you can type in your questions into the questions panel of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentations. Now, you are listening using your computer's speaker system by default. If you have problems with the audio, please try to increase your computer's volume. If you are still having issues, please log out and try to reconnect. The broadcast is being recorded, and in a few days, everyone will receive a link with the archived recording. Before we begin the presentations, we have two polls that we'd like you to participate in. These are helpful in providing us and the speakers some information about you, the audience, and where you are. So I'm going to launch the first one now. We have 90 seconds to answer this, and then we'll have a second one come up shortly there right after. There we go. So what we're asking is where are you in your FSMA 204 journey? Are you beginner, just getting started, intermediate, you've read the rule and you're working on the plan, you're working with your collaborators? Or are you an expert and you're executing your program? We'd love to know, and this would be very helpful. Okay, we have another 30 seconds or so. And again, if you haven't answered the question, we'd really appreciate your input on this. Okay, 10 seconds. Okay. And the next question that we have is, we'd like to know what your role is. Are you a manufacturer? Are you in distribution, a food service operator, grocery retailer, or other? And again, this will be helpful. We'll keep this one open only for about a minute. Okay, about another 10 seconds. Okay, thank you. Great. All righty, so let's me introduce our first set of speakers. Hank and Jennifer, if you guys could open up your webcams. Hank Karayan is the Global Head of Cosmetics, Pharma, and FSMA at SGS. He started his career in pharmaceuticals and cosmetic ingredients, and then moved to GMP, Quality and Food Safety Consulting and Training, while acquiring academic and hands-on experience in strategic management. He has led multiple projects for multinational firms, SMEs, and regulatory bodies in various geographies, and held management positions within regional and global companies prior to joining SGS. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and a Master's of Business Administration, and has authored many publications in strategic management, as well as technical articles on food safety, food defense, FSMA, and GMP in food safety tech, and other publications. Jennifer Lott is the Technical Development Director at SGS. For food in North America. She is passionate about helping companies grow and succeed. Jennifer specializes in food and product safety management systems with particular expertise in all things associated with certification, including training, project management. Jennifer is a speaker at the Food Safety Consortium in October in Washington, DC. And Hank, I'm going to make you a presenter now. And we'll get your presentation up. There we go, perfect.
All right, thank you, Rick. It's always a pleasure to work with you on Food Safety Tech. Today, we're going to be spending our time together reviewing FSMA 204. Next slide, please. Next slide, Hank. For our agenda, I'll start with a brief introduction to SGS, a high-level overview of Subpart S, the traceability rule, then review a few acronyms you will hear often during our session. Next, Hank will discuss the traceability rule in more depth and share some steps to compliance. Following Hank's presentation, Trustwell will share some projects and discuss digital traceability. We'll wrap up the session with Q&A. Next slide. During today's presentation, you'll hear many acronyms, starting with SGS, which stands for Society General du Surveillance. SGS is the world leader in the TIC, another acronym, testing, inspection, and certification industry. Was founded in 1878, performing grain inspections on ships, and has been in business for 140 plus years with close to 100,000 employees worldwide. We have 2,600 offices and labs and 7 focus areas. Next slide. SGS's food capabilities include, with some examples, testing, from chemical to microbiological, and integrity and authenticity, and many areas in between. If the testing division cannot assist you with your testing needs, SGS has a vast network of partners for your niche testing requirements. Certification. Accredited standards include BRCGS, FSSC, SQF, and ISO 9001 in North America, as well as unaccredited certifications like GMP HACCP based on Codex Alimentarius, and FSMA and FSVP. Second and first party audits, which are also known as supplier or internal audits. Inspections. SGS has a program in the auto industry where inspections are performed on leased car returns to identify any and all issues. We develop programs like this for clients around the world. Digital solutions and innovation include food traceability, remote auditing, and Realize, which is a food safety culture program. Our regulatory support consists of DigiComply, which is an amazing program used for horizon scanning and understanding what's happening around the world where you're not located. Label compliance review, and again, FSMA and FSVP requirements. And lastly, we have training. SGS can offer virtual, face-to-face, and e-learning courses. We have an academy that has thousands of training courses, and we can customize training to your specific needs based on the training we already have in our academy. Next slide. The traceability rule, FSMA 204, is covered under 21 CFR Part 1, Subpart S. The list shown in this slide is known as the FTL, or Food Traceability List. I'm not going to read this list to you. However, I do want to make an important point. It is called the FTL, and it is dynamic, meaning it can and will change, and I expect it to continue to grow. A large grocery chain in the USA is now requiring all of their non-traditional food manufacturing suppliers to meet the FSMA 204 requirements by the end of this year, not just those items on the FTL. Slide 6, or slide next. FSMA 204 requires those who manufacture, process, pack, or hold foods on the food traceability list to establish and maintain records containing KDEs, or key data elements, associated with different critical tracking events, or CTEs. While the requirements would only apply to those foods on the FTL, they were designated to be suitable for all FDA-regulated food products. And FDA has made it clear that it would encourage the voluntary adoption of these practices industry-wide. CTEs, or critical tracking events, are events in the food supply chain involving the growing, receiving, including the first receipt by a first receiver, transforming, creating, or shipping a food. The key data elements, or KDEs, include information associated with a CTE, or critical tracking event, for which a record must be established and maintained in accordance with the subpart. Another term we'll be using a lot is TLC, which is a traceability lot code. It's basically a descriptor, often alphanumeric, used to identify a traceability lot. Although the concept of a traceability lot code is not new to the food industry, what's new are the requirements to maintain it as it moves within the supply chain. We will see these traceability requirements in real terms in the next slides. At this point, I'll hand the presentation over to Hank.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you, and hello, and welcome wherever you are joining us from. In this next segment of the SGS presentation, we will be focusing a little bit on the practical aspects. Now that you have heard the various acronyms, CTEs, KDEs, TLCs, and FTLs, let us see how that really works out in the real world. We've been working with the industry and with our digital partners on many fronts, actually, to make this really regulation, the FSMA traceability rule, as understandable as possible for the industry and make it practical as well. The idea is to streamline and simplify the compliance requirements so that everyone in the food supply chain would be able to identify which parts of FSMA 204 would apply to them. For instance, in this table right here, you can see the CTEs, critical tracking events, that we have been able to identify so far. And this is not a comprehensive list, but it is really a list based of our experience and our discussions, looking into various supply categories. For example, a farm or a co-op of farms, the one that you see at the beginning of the table, at the top of the table, that are not involved in processing. You can see there that they would have specific CTEs related to harvesting, cooling, packing, and shipping. Whereas a seafood operation that also has, in our example, that could also have a retail business as well running, would have to have cooling CTEs, packing CTEs, as well as transformation. There's processing going on, right? But at the beginning of the process, there's always land receiving from the sea, and also shipping, as well as receiving CTEs specifically for the retail operation. Now, I don't want you to worry too much about those CTEs right now, because we will see another example later on. But just keep in mind just that whichever operation, whichever activity that your business falls into, there would be specific CTEs that are applicable to you. So the last one on the table is the restaurant. where you could see that it's only responsible for one CTE primarily. And again, this is a general example, not specific to your own operations. You might have some processing going on, but a restaurant that only receives and sells would be responsible for, would have a CTE, which was one CTE, which would be receiving in this case. And the reason why that is important is because the regulation requires, and Jennifer already mentioned this, key data elements. So basically traceability, I call them traceability documentation required at each critical tracking event. So at each CTE, you would need to have specific key data elements or documents. In this example, for instance, we can track from left to right a harvested produce or a seafood received at a dock. In both cases, these agriculture commodities, let's call them, would have to be assigned a traceability lot code. So the TLC, or the traceability lot code, would have to be generated either at harvesting stage for produce or first land receiving for seafood. And as they go through to the next steps into packing, shipping, and receiving, the source TLC would have to propagate as well. And this is one of the important aspects of the regulation itself. And when they undergo some sort of processing, like cutting, chopping, eviscerating in case of a certain seafood, then a new traceability lot code would need to be assigned. The traceability lot code becomes now the identity, if you like, of the product. And any documents generated at the next stages of the supply chain should therefore be linked to that specific traceability lot code. As you can see here in this example, grocers and food service entities such as restaurants, cafeterias, etc., only need to receive and keep those traceability documents. So there are, and this goes hand in hand with what we have seen in the previous slide. So here we can see already how the operation works in terms of CTEs and KDEs. Going back to the regulation, it was first published in November 2022, and the compliance deadline is set for January 2026. There are certain exemptions in FSMA 204. For example, certain small producers, small retail food establishments, and restaurants. Also, food whose packaging maintains integrity and there is prevention from subsequent contamination, as well as foods that are subject to a kill step. So there are specific exemptions, but I have to mention here that we're seeing more and more a push from various industry players, from food retailers to distributors and sometimes even restaurant chains to adopt, and there is really this incentive to adopt those requirements across the whole food supply chain and across different food categories, not necessarily just the FDL categories. So, and this is a significant development that creates a new dynamic in food traceability and in terms of compliance for FDL, the high risk, let's say, products that are covered by the regulation, as well as the non-FDL food categories as well. So how do you do this? How do we start? Where do you start? How do you proceed? Well, to start your traceability compliance journey, the first step is to learn about FSMA 204, obviously, and this would help you also get some sort of a structure in place and identify which products, which processes in your operations are impacted by the regulation. Because once you know about the regulation, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, and what products require which kind of documentation at each CTE. So at this stage, then you would be able to identify which products and processes are affected by the rule. Which critical tracking events would apply to you? I just showed you a table as an example, so you may or may not be, that may not be one of the activities that you're involved with, but that's fine because at the end of the exercise, there's no company like the other. So you might have CTEs that are different. Next, you will need to do some sort of process mapping, a process mapping of your supply chain, and also to identify your traceability gaps, if there are any. You can do this either through your internal resources or with the help of external experts or consultants. Once process mapping is complete, you then need to set your objectives, budgets, and plan your implementation. And at this stage, if you decide to use technology, then your technology partner should also be involved in this whole process, because obviously, technology is here to enhance and support your compliance journey. Once the traceability system is implemented, you will obviously need to have some sort of a monitoring system, some KPIs for effectiveness to measure its effectiveness, and even more so, you have to make sure that that system is running, because now it's a part of your food safety system. So it goes hand in hand with your food safety system, and it needs to be maintained every step of the way. So in terms of process mapping, we have talked about process mapping and its importance. So let's look at the process mapping exercise itself. So process mapping is basically, at the process mapping stage, we are looking at specific constituents. There is no single way of doing process mapping. However, it would help if your process mapping includes upstream and downstream processes. Where does the product come from? Where does it go? Your flow of activities of people within your supply chain, within your own operations, the product as it undergoes different changes, locations where products are held, locations where products undergo changes and transformation, and wherever they are received, documentation, your current documentation. Your suppliers, your partners, because they might have their own systems, they might have their own documentation, and they will most of the time have some external documents that would have to be also, that your system would have to at some point in time get and transfer internally. Then there's the machinery, the technology as well that you are using in your operations, your storage operations, your transportation activities. Yes, transportation itself is important to understand basically at what point are you receiving your products, at what point are you shipping, and based on your transportation modes, you would also understand what kind of documentation would be practical. Remember, we want to talk about practicality as much as we want to talk about compliance. So it is important that your system, that your traceability system is also is effective and efficient, and is practical for you to use. Which also brings us to your current IT system. How well is your current IT system developed? Is it a highly developed IT system? Is it a basic IT system? And in some cases, is it a manual system that uses some basic functionalities of a computer? So all of those are considerations because based on these, you would be able to move to the next level, which you will see here as an example of identifying your CTEs and your documentation, traceability documentation, your KDEs. So in this specific example, we're looking at an operation, at the seafood operation, a snapshot of it, obviously, just a part of it, which is the land receiving part. So when the vessel receives all the way to the actual first landing. And that first landing activity, as you could see here on the slide in the middle, is your CTE activity. So the CTE activity right here, so it also has some documentation attached to it. And this is where you identify your CTEs, you identify your KDEs, traceability documents, and then at this stage, you also need to create your TLC, your traceability Lott code. So SGS has been working also on this digital technology, as I've told you before. It's just that the solution itself is really capable of extracting information. And here's an example of CTEs and KDEs identified using the digital traceability. Basically, technology enables companies to trace their products across any specific area of their supply chain. As you can see here, there are various CTEs associated with this specific operation, and you could see the system generates its own KDEs or documents, traceability documentation requirements for each specific CTE. To facilitate your compliance journey and make the implementation process even easier, in our assessment, a digital traceability solution must meet the following minimum criteria. So it must incorporate your FSMA 204 compliance language and methodology. It should be easy to use, and that's an obvious one, but it is an important one. It should be cost effective. And just a reminder that at the beginning of the process, FDA had launched the low or no cost challenge for traceability, digital traceability solutions out there. It must be scalable because, as we'll see later, there's different needs, different companies and different entities and different operations have different needs. A small operation would have less of a need of technology in some cases, or there might be a more complex operation that would require multiple suppliers to bring in and to send in their data. So every operation, each entity is different. Therefore, it has to be scalable. Your solution, the IT solution, must be scalable. There should be flexible deployment, whether it's cloud-based or other deployment options. Data security is an absolute important one. So you need to make sure solution that you are relying on is secure. Integration interoperability is something that is extremely important and becoming more and more important because your system, your traceability system, is not going to be a standalone system in an island. It has to speak to other systems most of the time. It has to bring in data. You have to feed data from different systems, from different suppliers, different partners and different systems. So information coming in and information coming out should be able to communicate with other traceability systems as well. Would be good if your system has AI capabilities. It just makes life easier a lot of times for special applications, and it's been very, very useful with the software that we have developed. And then multi-language support is an important one as well because supply chains exist across the world, and therefore your partners, your suppliers will need specific interfaces at specific points in time. If you are dealing with foreign suppliers, then they would appreciate and it would be more effective for them to be able to have language capabilities that would offer them possibilities to understand what they're reading, to input what the information that's required from them. So multilingual support is an important one as well. With regard to data ingestion options, the one that we talked about, that we mentioned early on, there are many technologies out there with IoT sensors, RFID, NFC, etc. Also, many operational platforms and ERPs that generate traceability data of different sorts. There is also readable data in barcodes, QR codes, commercial documents received from your suppliers, and therefore, an effective traceability solution would be capable of ingesting data from various sources and incorporating that data into a traceability system. This would help you reduce your workload, and it would increase also your operational efficiency. So in the next few slides, we'll be looking at some of the uses of digital technology, digital traceability technology, and projects that were conducted. So you'll be seeing an example from a farmer's co-op, and then another example from the seafood sector, and so on. So let's move on to the next one. So you could see here a produce farm project, and the produce farm project specifically in this case ships about 10,000 cases of different produce. So basically, the produce is distributed to grocery stores, wholesalers, distributors, and so on. So it's an operation that incorporates various channels. With this specific operation, we will able to identify with the clients 5 specific CTEs, and those were harvesting, cooling, packing, transforming, and shipping. And we were able to implement a solution that the client would benefit from, not only for compliance purposes, but also for operational purposes as well. A seafood project that we've been working on, and it's still ongoing. So it's basically an operation that incorporates fishing, but also processing, and as well as importing, wholesaling, and retail. So it's an integrated kind of a project. With this specific seafood partner, seafood company, we were able to identify land receiving, cooling, packing, transformation, shipping, and receiving as the CTEs, and therefore associated documents were identified, and the work is right now in progress. And the last example I'm going to go through is the farm and food. It's an integrated kind of an entity, an operation that integrates farming as well as food service operation. So the good thing, the nice thing about this, and which caught our really hearts and attention was that the fact that this operation specifically addresses students from 15 schools with their cafeterias. So we had 2 kind of focus areas in this specific project. There was the farm operation where we have identified CTEs, specifically harvesting, cooling, packing, transforming, and shipping, but also the food service side of it, where they were doing some sort of processing, preparing kits for the students, and that also incorporates receiving the produce from the farms. So again, this is another operation that basically helps the whole community and benefit from a traceability digital solution specifically for the safety of our students. We have seen together examples, therefore, where where digital traceability and traceability in general have been implemented, and we hear every once in a while, some specific needs for specific clients, and but those needs will be specific and different for each company. However, the traceability journey has begun for a lot of companies in the industry, and we are glad to see the dynamic that it is shaping into. We are looking forward to the next steps, and obviously to the next segment as well during this presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rick again for the next segment.
Thank you, Hank and Jennifer. Appreciate that. That was a good presentation. We do have some questions that we will be directing to you during the question and answer session after the next presentation. Julie, I'm going to make you the presenter.
You?
Here.
All right.
And while Julie is getting her webcam and the presentation ready, I want to introduce both Julie and Max Braun. Max is the supply chain partner experience at Chick-fil-A. He leads Chick-fil-A's traceability and cold chain monitoring teams. He has nearly 15 years of experience in implementing federal policy spanning multiple federal agencies. Max is passionate about leveraging federal law to unlock additional insights and analytical value for organizations. He holds a bachelor's degree from Louisiana State University in political science, public policy, go Tigers. Julie McGill is the Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy and Insights at Trustwell, where she monitors food regulations, is engaged with involving industry work, advises and educates internal stakeholders and external partners on impacts of the food supply chain. Prior to joining Trustwell, Julie led initiatives in food service and convenience retail at GS1 US. She was founding team member at Transoria, which was one of the first GDSN data pools. Julie started her career at Coors Brewing Company in Golden, Colorado, working on their store-level data team, managing the distributor EDI program. Julie is a speaker at the Food Safety Consortium Conference in October in Washington, D.C. Julie, turn it over to you.
All right, and Rick, I
was just going to say that Max is joining us via a little bit different route. He's calling in, so unfortunately we won't get to see his webcam, but he is here with us all and with us live. So I again wanted to turn things back over to you.
Thank you so much, Rick. And can you see my slides?
I can see your slides, yes.
Fantastic. Okay, and Max, can we hear you?
Hey, how's it going, Julie?
There we go. So for the audience, I'm not going to turn on my camera. Max and I are going to have a fireside chat, but we've got some slides here that we'll use to guide our conversation. So thank you so much for having us today, Rick, and thank you to the SGS team for that introduction on FSMA 204. Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about insights. So now that you've learned about the rule and understand what those critical tracking events are, those key data elements, and the information that you need for traceability record keeping, we're going to talk about the journey that Chick-fil-A has been on to compliance. And so with that, I'm going to just take a second here to do a real quick introduction. If you're not familiar with Trustwell, you might know us as Food Logic and Genesis Foods, and many companies do. Food Logic, I've been on the Food Logic team for over 7 years now, and here at Food Logic, our platform manages everything from supplier compliance to recall management. But today we're going to talk about our traceability platform. We're going to talk about, traceability for FSMA 204, and within our platform, we're able to capture those critical tracking events and that data that Hank talked about, being able to capture and validate that you have that information that you need to be compliant with FSMA 204. A lot of folks know us as Genesis Foods. You may use this for labeling. And so when you think about nutritional labeling, that nutritional facts panel, the ingredient statements, allergen statements, et cetera, Genesis has been around for a very long time. And the two companies came together a couple years ago, and we really complement one another, with the different solutions that we provide to the industry. So with that, like I said, Julie McGill from Trustwell. My background, I was at GS1 US for 16 years and then moved over to Food Logic. Max is with Chick-fil-A and is on partner experience and is very engaged with not only traceability, but also FSMA 204. So for our presentation today, we've got slides that have, we're going to cover the different areas of FSMA 204. So the things that we just talked about, the roles, the data attributes, the food traceability list. We'll walk through those, and Max, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. So we'll kick things off with, how is Chick-fil-A affected? We know that companies need to look across their businesses as they prepare for FSMA 204, and mapping out those supply chain processes and understanding your roles is critical to then ensuring that you are being compliant. So as an operator, what things did you discover at Chick-fil-A as you were assessing your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Julie. So one thing that I'm just going to say a lot, and I apologize, it will sound like a broken record, but FSMA compliance is a cross-functional endeavor, and you need to be engaged with all aspects of your organization to ensure that you're really covering all your bases. From a Chick-fil-A standpoint, it really started back in the beginning of 2023 after the final rule was released in 2022. Just kind of level setting, where are we and what areas touch FSMA from an internal standpoint. So, starting with the FTL, what ingredients do we have that fall in the FTL? And that's not as simple as just looking and saying, okay, hey, we have cheese is on there. A lot of that was engagement with suppliers, understanding, ingredients, the manufacturing process, was a kill step involved, is the level of acid in, the sliced apples that we do to keep them from browning, is that sufficient for a kill step? No, it's not. A lot of that just requires you to work with the experts in that field, and it takes time, right? Like we're slotting this work in amongst the, every day, keeping the doors open and serving customers really well. So ensuring you give yourself enough lead time to explore those. From that, it's understanding the CTEs. It's pretty straightforward from a restaurant standpoint. You're receiving from your distributor. So it's, very clearly laid out in the rule, and SGS did a wonderful job of explaining what it is that you are responsible for. But then dig a little further. Does your organization have any ancillary functions? From Chick-fil-A, we operate our own distributors in some markets. So that opens up a whole new Pandora's box of CTEs that we're responsible for. Now we're looking at receiving from suppliers. We're looking at now transmitting to restaurants. Within that, if we have DC to DC transfers, any cross-docking, that all is going to fall under the law. And so understand, who are the parties that are responsible? Is that IT on the distribution side? Is that, your supplier rep? Who do you need to be working with to make sure that you're connected there? Are you operating commissaries? If you're a restaurant, you have commissaries, or you have franchisees that operate commissaries within their market. That too counts as a CTE for transformation and distribution. So making a really good baseline understanding of what your organization looks like is kind of, table stakes, if you will. But then, the way that Chick-fil-A approaches, okay, that's great. We know where we stand, where our, local owner operators stand. But the next big thing is your partners, right? Like the only thing worse for us than a restaurant getting shut down is a distributor getting shut down, because now we are looking at an entire market that is compromised because, maybe a partner wasn't FSMA compliant. So we dive in the next step, and it's really about outreach and engagement, talking to your partners. Hey, what are you doing? How are you going about this? It's critical not just from making sure they're covered, but also making sure you're aligned. And we'll hit on this a little bit later, but you're going to have, the more partners you're working with that touch your FTL items, the more complexity you're adding to the system. So the sooner that you can get aligned and get engaged with those partners, the better off you're going to be. And quite frankly, the more, we're about a year and a half away from, a little less than that, from compliance. These are discussions that hopefully you're already having, but if you're not, I'd say as soon as we get off this webinar, start firing off some emails and start making some calls to your partners to begin those discussions, because as an industry, the more we can collaborate and align on consistent processes, the more effective our implementation is going to be.
There we go. Yeah, and if I'm hearing you, FSMA 204 is a team effort, and it is not just inside your own four walls.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, let's go to the next slide. So you talked a little bit about the food traceability list, and certainly, when I think of Chick-fil-A, I think of chicken sandwiches and, waffle fries and things like that. And the FTL can be tricky, right? Especially when you have items that are used as ingredients. So, identifying a head of romaine or a tomato, right? Pretty straightforward. But when you get into the components of your salads, right? Such as soft cheeses, you mentioned the apples, like Max, I love that market salad at Chick-fil-A right now. That is my go-to item. But I will tell you, the last time I ordered it, I'm like, this has a lot of FTL items. So do you want to talk about like limited time offers, seasonal items? Like as an operator, what did you discover as you were assessing the FTL, and how are you working with teams to change those processes?
So yeah, that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges, right, is setting that baseline. And for us, the FTL for the salads is straightforward. We were able to work with our quality and safety team and with our sourcing and quickly highlight, our romaine, our slice, when we slice the strawberry, our tomatoes, all fall in the FTL. Really important to have that baseline and make sure everyone's aligned. I think the thing that surprised us most was, though, not everybody across the organization, and I guess this shouldn't be surprising, but not everybody across the organization that had an understanding of what FSMA 204 was or how it was going to impact, our menu and culinary teams. LTOs are a great example, because often you'll have, we're talking a year or two lead time, and your culinary team is already planning out next summer and 2 summers from now's, limited time offer today with the ingredients. And, I think of our pimento cheese, shameless plug here, but our honey pepper pimento sandwich just came back on Monday. And the pimento has both a semi-soft cheese and sliced peppers. It is both delicious and highly exposed to the FPL. And so it's working with your culinary teams and your sourcing leads to let them know, hey, when you bring on a new product, even if it's just to explore, because a lot of these are very iterative and you're going to go through iterations on the ingredients, you need to be looking for, certain items and let us know, let the traceability team know, let your quality and safety team know that you're exploring those, because there are going to be other requirements that when we go to source that product that we need to plan for. And again, it's all about the lead time. So I think that communication with those teams and doing it ahead of time is so critical. Get in to the best of your ability, get into that first step of any kind of new menu offering, new ingredient offering. A lot of times that also requires you to engage your suppliers. We've had questions and gone back and forth with suppliers on the way they process products, as I mentioned earlier. And so making sure you're aligned with your suppliers so that, you may view something's FTL item, they may not, and they might have a really good reason why, and that might remove it from your list of concern. But conversely, they may consider it and you don't, and you guys need to get aligned. So starting that early communication and just understanding that lead time is critical, because by the time that LTO has been conceived and the marketing team's already coming up with how they're going to push this out into the marketplace, it's too late to pull back, and you've got to be ready to ingest that traceability data from the supplier and distributor to bring it to your network.
Gotcha. Right. So it goes well beyond the IT piece of collecting the data. It's working with those teams, making sure that they understand as you're making these choices, here's the ripple effect across the different teams, like you said, working with suppliers, acquiring those ingredients, et cetera. And I think that's, you hit the nail on the head there with, don't assume, right? Like have those conversations with your suppliers. Yeah. All right. So let's go to the next slide. So that gets into the traceability record keeping. And for the audience, this image that's on the screen here is from the FDA's website. They have a fantastic library of supply chain scenarios. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I strongly encourage you to go look at the FDA's website. In this particular example, it's produce, and it shows all of the supply chain owners across the top. You'll notice that there's, we got the farm and the harvester, the cooler. Once we get to initial packing, you'll notice, and Hank talked about this, the TLC source. So this is the point that they are assigning that lot code. So in this instance, the initial packer assigns that lot code, and they are the TLC source. That's the place where it was assigned. But you'll notice when it gets to the processor, which is the next step, we have another TLC source. And that's because in this example, the pack house there might have been whole head romaine. And when it got to the processor, they shredded it and put it into bags. Well, now I've got a new lot code, right? I have a new product, which is the shredded romaine, and I have a new lot code. And so I've assigned a new lot code, and then that lot code has to be passed along the supply chain to all the partners, the distributor and on to the retail food establishment. So when we look at this record keeping, down below, we've got all the different critical tracking events, right? They're all the colored bubbles down below. And you'll notice that there's some that are repeating, right? Those shipping events, the receiving events, anytime a product moves through the supply chain, you have to capture that data. And if you are the shipper, you have to share that data about that shipping event for those FTL items with the recipient. So, recognizing that there's data capture, but there's also data sharing as part of FSMA 204. And Max, you touched on this a little bit on that first question, but what things did you need to enhance or change to prepare to collect FSMA 204 data, both from your suppliers and your distributor partners, but was there also a component on the Chick-fil-A side? So could you talk about that?
Certainly. I think the most critical thing when we think about the traceability data is standardization. And Chick-fil-A is a huge proponent of the work that GS1 is doing. And I'd encourage anyone on this call who's not familiar with GS1 to pop it in your browser and Google GS1 initiatives around data standardization, but especially traceability. The big thing is when you have a broad network, you're going to have partners that are able to transmit data in certain ways. And you need to be ready to accept that data and transmit that data in multiple formats. And that requires kind of both flexibility in your IT systems. We leverage Trustwell to help us tie in with our suppliers and distributors so that whether they use an API or an SFTP, whether they're transmitting EDI files all the way down, we have some partners that send CSVs with traceability data. We're able to ingest that and make it as easy on the supplier as possible so they can do business with us and do so in a cost-effective manner. We're not asking people to make big IT investments just to get us traceability data. So I think that's the first piece. But the second is that standardization. We use, in our produce world, we're very passionate about the PTI label, the Produce Traceability Initiative labels that capture the G10, the pack date, and the lot code for all KDEs for those produce items. And we ask that not only is that label affixed to each case of produce that goes to a Chick-fil-A restaurant, but that our partners are able to transmit that data to us electronically. We'll talk a little bit how Chick-fil-A is approaching compliance on behalf of our restaurants, but having that data in both human readable format and electronically is so valuable because, there will be times when, the data transfers break down and you need to be able to reference that information, or you're in a restaurant and you need to audit something. Because along those lines, we're focused on data capture today, but we need to think about monitoring compliance down the road. In 2 years, you want to make sure that data feed you're getting from your supplier or you're getting it from your distributor is still complete and valid, right? That there are no gaps there, and that the data you're getting matches what shows up in your restaurant or what shows up in your distribution center. So those are all really critical things. A big part of what we're doing is mastering as much of the data as possible. So, we have standardization across the network. Right now we're in, the United States. We have restaurants in Canada. So we need to make sure that we're able to maintain kind of a standardized system. And that's been a lot of work, actually more work than I think we envisioned going in, of just getting alignment across our supply and distribution network on master data management. The last piece that both Julie and SGS team hit on was the traceability lot code source. This is the net new piece of data the FDA is asking for, and this is like their magic unlock. That if you think about it, in the event of the investigation, this allows the FDA to take implicated products and just go look straight back to the farm or factory where that item was produced or harvested from. And it's challenging because there's no proscribed way to capture that data. We lean very heavily on a GS1 standard called the GLN, Global Location Number, which a supplier or distributor is able to generate with GS1, and it when queried, it will point to a specific location, a specific factory or facility that can be cited as the source reference, but it's not prescribed. So another example of a point of communication you need to be having with suppliers, or suppliers that you need to be thinking about, how do you want to capture this and transmit it in a sustainable and scalable way to the next downline receiver.
Yeah, and that's a great point, is TLC source is brand new to everyone, right? So figuring out, lot codes aren't new, but who's the source of the lot code is, right? We haven't been transmitting that. And I think that's a very, very good point. The other piece that you touched on that I think is very compelling is a lot of folks are focused right now on capturing the data, but you also want to think about compliance. So thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's it definitely, capturing the data is one thing, making sure you have everything, that's another. So if we look at the next question, how will we capture and maintain the data? And so, Chick-fil-A is in a unique spot in the supply chain, right? As an operator, like you just mentioned, you're getting data from your supplier and distributor partners. You have your restaurants, as well as you now have, in some parts of your business, CFA supply, right, which is your distribution arm. And so, big picture, you've got external partners, internal data, and things like that. What did it take, as you were educating teams and onboarding suppliers and things like that? There's a component of, here's what we need for the Chick-fil-A traceability program, and then this is FSMA 204, right? So there's the regulatory versus the Chick-fil-A program. So do you want to talk about like, how you're maintaining and capturing data, but also just that journey to helping folks understand why you're capturing it?
No, certainly. So yeah, Julie makes a good point. We have a FSMA 204 compliance program, which is laser focused on compliance with the law, a legal mandate. But Chick-fil-A also, through most of our products, is very focused on end-to-end traceability, being able to see, think of it almost as product visibility. And we'll talk about maybe ancillary benefits of your traceability program in a bit. But for us, it's really important to understand where product is in supply chain, with the goal of if your ultimate measure is on time and full, we want to make sure that product shows up in a restaurant and it's what our operators ordered. Traceability is a really important part of that because it allows us to see where product is, how much we have, and where it's going. So for us, the first step was really reaching out to every stakeholder in the supply chain and communicating our desired outcome from our traceability program. It's more than just a regulatory compliance. It is a way for us to serve our restaurants better, to serve our customers better, because we're able to get product to the restaurants. So we're never having to tell a customer, we can't offer that item today. Where that starts though is those communications with each stakeholder in supply chain, and it goes back to an ability to accept those KDEs and any other data that you're asking of those partners in whatever form they can give it to you. Because the investment costs, especially today, and we're seeing in the produce world, the service providers that offer ERPs and WMSs that can support FSMA compliance know they have the market cornered, and it's not a cheap capital investment. It's quite expensive. So we want to be able to meet partners where they're at, and again, that's where a third-party provider can really assist if that's an option that you're considering, and allowing you to kind of just say, hey, if you have the data, send us the data, and we'll work with it from there. From there, I think it's just communicating on expectations and being very clear with partners and even internal stakeholders. When you think about your IT departments that are going to be ingesting and making this data available, what do you need, and how do we need it presented? There are a lot of companies out there that are looking to leverage the rule, offering some silver bullet tech solutions, and there's a lot of value in these. A lot of emerging technologies that I think are really valuable and potentially in time could be quite expansive in industry. However, take the time to evaluate the tech solution in the context of your business. As a big company at Chick-fil-A, we've had a lot of companies that reach out to us saying, oh, hey, we can do it all for you. We've got the silver bullet. And then when you peel back the layers, you start to realize that, we have unique elements in our network and in our business that render that maybe a little less scalable. And so I really encourage you, as you're, beginning or continuing along your FSMA journey, as many of you are from the results of the poll, fully vet the tech solutions that are being offered to you or that you have internally, and take the time to see that not just how will it get me to January 20th of 2026, but how will that enable my business to grow and my traceability program to add more value to my organization in 27, 28, 29, and you start thinking out, for capital investments for a 5-year timeline. So I think, kind of boiling it back down, meeting partners where they're at is so critical. It's going to allow you to move faster and with less friction, but then also being very clear in your expectations, because just because a partner says, hey, yeah, we can give you that data, make sure that you guys are both on the same page of what that's going to look like, the cadence, the format, and the use of that data as you go forward.
All right. Yeah, and I think too the cadence is a good point. There is, are you sending me data after the delivery, that evening, the next day, a week later, right? I think defining some of that as you begin to work with your partners is going to be key, because you don't want to be misaligned on expectations.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So now let's get into, one of the things that FSMA 204 requires is that traceability plan, right? And with anything with regulations, right, the FDA, USDA, et cetera, they usually want you to have documentation that outlines how am I compliant. And so you've talked about all these different things that you've analyzed in your organization, working with your partners, et cetera. And I think those are all components of a good traceability plan. Being the owner of the plan is just the beginning, right? This isn't, as you said, this is not just a FSMA or an IT project, right? This involves many stakeholders across your organization. So who owns your traceability plan at Chick-fil-A, and what's your approach to keep that traceability plan updated?
Certainly. So the traceability plan, and kind of a little peek behind the curtain here, right? Chick-fil-A Inc. Overseas, we have almost over 3,000 restaurants in the country owned by local owner operators, and we're really proud of that model. And ultimately, the traceability plan falls on the restaurant. So each of our owner operators will be responsible for that, but with the backing of Chick-fil-A. And this is, Julie, to your point about the cross-functional nature of this is, Chick-fil-A is working to create the tools and the data infrastructure on behalf of our operators to make the data available to them in the event of an FDA investigation. And what that requires is just constant communication to our restaurants of, hey, this is what we're expecting of you. Auditing products when it comes into your restaurant at a periodic cadence to ensure that the data we're seeing from your distributor is the same as what you're seeing in your restaurant. To staying tight with our legal and industry partners as the expectations law evolve, or as industry learnings are kind of presented, and we can leverage each other's best practices. I think that's a big part of your kind of, when you review and update the plan, always setting a regular cadence, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, to take a look and make sure that, one, it still meets the requirements of the law, but two, it meets the needs of your business. As your business evolves, you may want to tweak your traceability plan. There might be certain elements of it that you can do better or do differently as things change. There's no requirement from the FDA that you can't review it too often or update it too often. As long as you maintain those records, that's critical. So as we go about it, we want to make sure we're still tight with our distributors, with our suppliers. We want to be close with our IT department, our legal department, just to make sure that what we have is optimized to our organization. I think, again, if you can keep those lines of communication open and stay tight with your peers, it really makes it easy, and it's gonna feel a little more seamless. As we've learned, it just kind of flows naturally. We have a regular cadence, and we are able to, make sure that what we're putting forward is the most effective thing for our local owner operators.
Yeah, and I love, when you were talking about your franchisees, it made me think of that whole, FSMA 204 is a team effort, right? And so matching up the physical and the digital, that's an area where, a lot of companies, you put this plan together, you've assessed your organization, you've done all the work, now make sure that it's working, right? Like that's what I was hearing you say, right? Let's do some
Absolutely.
audits to make sure that the physical, the digital information that we have matches the physical products that are actually in your restaurant.
Yeah, trust but verify.
There you go. Yes, love that. So so here in the home stretch real quick. So this slide here is from GS1 US, and I think it touches, it just blends in very well with all that you've talked about, Max. And thank you again for sharing your insights with the audience today. But looking beyond the regulation, right? How does this, data is valuable. So how does this help my business? And I think this ROI beyond compliance slide really gives you a snapshot of where you could take this, right? Once you've made sure that you've got your processes in place, you understand how you're going to capture the data and what you need to capture, et cetera, this data is so valuable. So looking ahead, if you could just, please share some of your vision as far as utilizing traceability data at Chick-fil-A.
GS1 nailed it with this slide. I think this does a great job of highlighting what you can, the world of possible with a robust traceability program. For us at Chick-fil-A, it all comes down to product visibility, seeing that flow from supplier all the way to consumption in the restaurant. And that allows us to manage inventory at the restaurant, at the distribution center, provide forecasts to our suppliers so we're ordering accurately. It gives us insight into timeliness of deliveries and ensuring that we're optimizing against, best buy dates and getting it kind of at the freshest and peak of quality. So the world is your oyster when it comes to this. And I think, again, look at this slide, think about how it can work in your organization. Everybody's going to have a little bit of different, use case or value they can drive from it. But don't let your traceability program merely be a compliance check of the box. There's so much opportunity with the federal mandate standing behind you saying, you got to do this. Well, how can you extract more value from it? How can you make this actually improve your business rather than just be another kind of, oh gosh, you got to do it, check the box with the feds. There's a lot of opportunity here. So I'd highly encourage you to explore in your specific business what you can be doing a little bit better, a little bit differently, thanks to the traceability data.
Sure. All right, so thank you so much for that. All right, so I am going to stop sharing, Rick, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Julie. I'm going to run our next poll. We're going to run that for about 60 seconds, and then I'm going to ask our speakers to come up on their webcams and unmute themselves at that point. And then from there, I've got a bunch of questions that have come in from our audience, and so this should be pretty exciting. But in the interim, let's get this poll going. Where are you in the process of communication of your FSMA 204 plans? Select one of them, please. Speaking with internal teams, communicating with product suppliers, communicating with customers, or we haven't communicated plans to anyone yet. And I invite our audience to participate now, please. Okay, if you haven't already voted, we got about another 15 seconds before I got to close the poll. Again, please do so. And again, if there's any additional questions, please enter them into the question panel. Okay, all right, well, thank you, everyone. And okay, Julie, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now. So that's great. I mean, certainly, because we've got about a little under 200 people on the call right now. So big picture, seeing those numbers is, is fantastic. I mean, certainly I get it, right? Some folks haven't communicated externally yet because they're still putting their plans together. But it's encouraging to see that folks are starting those external and internal conversations, right? That they're getting those things in order because that's so very important. As we said throughout, both presentations, FSMA 204 is a team effort, right? So the record keeping can't be done alone, right? You're going to need to work with your supply chain partners. And if you ship products, you need to have conversations with those partners as well to understand how you need to share that information, outside of your own four walls.
Hank, any thoughts, and Jennifer, any thoughts that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is really very, very good news. It just tells us that over half of the participants have actually started doing something about it. Almost 21% of the participants have already started the journey with their partners, with their suppliers, with their customers. There's a certain percentage of companies or participants that have not yet started probably the process, or maybe they're at the very beginning of the process, but that's very, very good and encouraging news. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, let's and hide the results. And here we are. Okay. Okay, well, we have a series of different questions. Hank, I think this came in during your presentation. Why the CTEs for seafood, fishing, and retail does not include harvesting?
In case of seafood, the CTEs would include first land receiving and not harvesting. That's because that's the way the regulation has kind of set it up. However, it does not mean that you shall not include harvesting. So it's something that we have been working on with our seafood partners as well. And there are some regulations out there, as a lot of you are aware of, that address the harvesting requirements, that put some harvesting specific requirements for harvesting specific seafood species. So that also comes into play. But that's a conversation that needs to happen on case-by-case basis, according to whether it's a farming exercise, whether it's wild catching. So there's a lot of different elements that go into that kind of question as to which elements of harvesting in seafood should be included, and when and at what level. So it's a conversation that needs to happen when we are doing that planning with the clients.
Yeah, I think that gets into, the whole piece of make sure that you understand what your role is, because like you were saying, if you are doing aquaculture harvesting, right, that for aquaculture food, there's very specific language in subpart S, whereas if you're on the vessel and you're, catching fish from a vessel, that's a different set of full or partial exemptions. And that's one thing we touched on it a little bit, Rick, but I think exemptions, definitely. There's some size exemptions for restaurants, for small farms. There's exemptions for things if you're donating food and things like that. And so making sure that you understand where you sit in the supply chain. And Hank, you talked about mapping out your supply chain. We do this, this, and this, right? That'll help you define, do I need to do record keeping?
Okay, thank you. All right, next question is a recommendation to incorporate FSMA 204 language and methodology in the system technology. What does this mean? What is an example of that type of important language to have in the technology system? Jennifer, you want to take a stab at this, or Hank?
Yeah, I think that came in my segment. Obviously, surely you could. Yeah, we talk about this also with different technology providers as well. FSMA 204 has specific requirements, right? So there is the CTEs, KDEs, TLCs, FTL. So there's quite a few acronyms. There's quite a few definitions of different areas and requirements within the regulation. Now, it is therefore important for the actual traceability solution, the digital traceability solution, to have those specific requirements as they are defined under FSMA 204, because we cannot go about and call an activity CTE just because we think it's a CTE, because the regulation itself is very clear on what is a CTE. We cannot say, well, these are the documents you need to have for traceability to work well, because that's how your current food safety, because this is what we learned from, let's say, an experience with a food safety management system, for instance, and with a technology that was used for specific compliance with that or conformance with that food safety management system. That's not enough, because at the end of the day, there is specific expectations for compliance. And let's not forget, why is FDA doing this? It's because at the end of the day, when there's an investigation, they want to know, they want to reach out to the supply chain and ask for specific data sets. And that includes, let's say, sortable data sheets. And just a simple example, and if your system was not built on FSMA specific language or methodology, getting that sortable spreadsheet, just as a simple example among many, would be a challenge. So that's why it's, when you want to invest your time and resources on a technology, just make sure that it was built for FSMA 204.
Okay. All right, Max, I think this is targeted towards you. If a retailer, convenience store, restaurants rely on their distributor, what exactly does the retailer need to capture electronically? And can it be done by taking a picture of packing slips or KDEs at a store and store it on a digital HACCP checklist?
Okay, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer, so take this with a grain of salt. The answer is yes, you can have your distributor maintain that data for you. In fact, I think this is a service offering you're going to see some distributors provide, at a cost, of course, as a value add. However, the law clearly states that you are responsible, for ensuring the accuracy of that data. So you can't just say, hey, my distributor's going to hold it, and then the FDA comes along, sees that like there's half the data's missing, and you just raise your hands and say, oh, my bad. You're still ultimately responsible for ensuring that your data is complete. Now, the second part of the question, the law also clearly states the data needs to be available in electronic sortable spreadsheet, so Excel or CSV, and be able to provide it within 24 hours of an FDA request. So taking photos of labels would, unfortunately, in my personal opinion, again, not legal advice, not suffice. But I would encourage you to talk to either some kind of regulatory counsel or your distributor and see what they're able to provide for you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Let me build on that real quick, Rick. Like it says in the rule, you can do it on paper or electronically, right? As long as the for the capture and storage, you have to store it for 2 years. So you could, take a picture, capture it. But then if you're part of an investigation, you're going to have to take that information and put it into the sortable spreadsheet that we've been talking about throughout this presentation. There are some exceptions. Let's go back to the exceptions for certain size companies where you could provide documentation and not the spreadsheet, but make sure, like Max just said, review the rule, make sure that you meet that. If you're below the threshold, make sure, confirm that you do meet that threshold, because the spreadsheet is how you're going to convey the data to the FDA. So you can store it however you want, but you have 24 hours to return that data to the FDA. So if you can take it from those digital docs and drop it into a spreadsheet and get it, review it and get it to the FDA in 24 hours, you could do that. But for most, they want to have the data somewhere where they're able to export it into a spreadsheet, and that might be multiple systems, it might be a central system, but all those data points that are part of FSMA 204 for the events that you own, you got to be able to pull those key data elements and put them into a spreadsheet that you'll share with the FDA.
Right. Max, while we have you on the phone, has Chick-fil-A already made GS1 a requirement of all food suppliers?
It is not a requirement of all food suppliers. There's a couple of nuances there, but we are actively working with our suppliers to bring them up to GS1 standards.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me just throw this out to the panel. Are the specifics required for food traceability list items also something required for a product outside of this FTL?
So why don't I start and then I'll let the others jump in. The FDA has really good examples, like I said, on their website where they show some of the easy things, right? Like the produce example where it's romaine. But then they also have examples where they have an example for one of them is like a tuna salad. And they talk about how some of the ingredients are not on the FTL and some of the ingredients are on the FTL. So the finished product is on the FTL, but some of the components, some are and some aren't. And so, items that are outside the FTL, you know, as Jen mentioned, there are some trading partners that are like, we want to do traceability for all food, right? So they're going beyond the regulation. But when we're kind of in the realm of FSMA 204, there are going to be times when you're handling an ingredient that's not on the list, and then you're going to make something new and it is on the list. So another example is cheese, right? The milk and the rennet and the salt, not on the list. But if you make feta, feta is on the list. So look at those supply chain examples from the FDA, because they do a really good job of giving you those visuals of where you're going to need to have a traceability plan, where you're going to need to capture attributes and things like that. So yeah, so Jennifer or Hank, anything to add to that?
I think what I'd like to add is that for the ingredients that aren't on the food traceability list, you've got traceability already because it's part of the requirements with HACCP and risk-based preventive controls and such. So you're just, you know, supplementing what we already have in the food industry with what's required with the items on the FTL.
Okay. Throw this out again to the panel. Our current traceability system tracks the product from receipt and through production. For example, what the item is packed into. For FSMA 204, am I correct in that we will now need to digitally track the different things we do with the items prior to shipping? For example, vac cooling, washing, slicing. If so, then it seems that at each step, we will need to scan the items into a traceability system with the above processes to comply with FSMA 204. Is this correct, or do you have any other suggestions? And let me know if I need to read that again.
That's a loaded question. I don't know if yeah, it's a big question. Honestly, this is something that we deal with on day-to-day basis, actually, when it comes to traceability, to the traceability rule and implementing the rule. So we're not going to say, yes, you need a scanner, yes, you need to scan it, yes, you need this, and yes, you need that, because IoTs are there and scanners are there to help companies achieve their goals and, you know, facilitates life for sure. But scanning is not a prescribed way of doing it. So, but if it's going to help you, and if it's going to facilitate your process, and I think, you know, it was clear in Max's message, and one of the things that really was very important was the fact that he said, you know, let it benefit your business, right? So this is a very important message to the audience right now, that, you know, you're not doing this just for compliance. You're also doing it for the benefit of your business. And if scanning is going to help, you know, your system, if it's going to make it more efficient, then maybe this is something you may want to consider. But nobody's saying, yeah, you shall definitely have a scanner, and you have to have this many, you know, a number of scans per hour and so on. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about efficiency and compliance at the same time.
But I also think it's important to communicate that if those are transformation steps, you have to manage the data.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
However you choose to do it.
Right. Max, you know, you're the one with the case history here, and I've gone through this. What did you learn during your FSMA 204 journey that was a aha moment?
That's a great question. I think two parts. One was just understanding just how far, you know, across the spectrum people were from compliance in our partners, among our partners. You know, some tracking this data and we just had to ask them to turn it on and we started receiving it. Some really hadn't even thought about FSMA 204. So understanding and educating partners was a very, probably took a little more effort than I initially imagined, but you know, again, that communication's gone a long way. The other part is when we really started to unpack what we could derive from the traceability data, to that point about kind of, you know, inventory visibility, product visibility across the supply chain. That was a really exciting aha moment of like, we could leverage this for so much more, and we could build systems and insights around the traceability data to feed other use cases throughout our business.
Cool. All right, I'm going to throw this out to the entire panel. Has there been any movement from GFSI to integrate FSMA 204 requirements into future GFSI requirements to cascade to standard owners?
I have not
Jenny?
seen anything come out of GFSI yet. So, but it's ever evolving.
Okay. Okay. An attendee is asking, when some companies are FDA and USDA supervised, is it all the goods that when it comes to FDA compliance, what about USDA? Is there any interaction, or that's not the right word, and I'm trying to interpret this on behalf of the attendee. But how does the FSMA traceability rule impact anybody who is USDA regulated?
Judy,
I mean, I'll just say from presentations that I've been in and things where, they've had both the FDA and the USDA on stage, like at the Food Safety Summit and things like that, they're talking to each other, right? They're watching what each other are doing and things like that. So to kind of, think that, oh, well, the USDA doesn't have FSMA 204, that's only FDA. I think that's a little short-sighted, right? They have indicated that, there's learnings, there's, things that we can see. And we saw that, for example, with healthcare, right? The Drug Supply Chain and Securities Act, DSCSA, they've been doing traceability for a while now, and we can take a page from some of the things that they learned in that industry and apply it to the hurdles and milestones and things that we're dealing with today. So I would definitely say, it's not a brick wall that's between USDA and FDA, right? That there's definitely, it's more of a dotted line.
Exactly.
All right, cool. Thank you. What are the conditions for access to data, such as during a system outage? What are the best practices for backups, data downloads, etc., in case of a system outage occurring?
I mean, I think some of that is IT best practices, right? You save, backup. You have other ways to tunnel into that data. But certainly, I will also say in the rule, I'm trying to remember exactly how the language is, but it says something to the effect of, if the FDA makes a request, it's 24 hours or a mutually agreed upon reasonable time frame or something like that, right? So, if there is, some reason, they give a good example is if some of your data is in another language and you need to translate it to English, for example, you might need a little extra time for that part of your data. So, with the outages, I would say, again, FSMA 204 is a team effort. So make sure that you talk to your IT teams about, we have to store it for 24 months. We have to be able to extract it in 24 hours. What's our backup plan, right? You always make contingency plans.
And it comes down to the amount of risk you're willing to take. So it's a risk-based exercise.
Yeah.
That's true. And another consideration is obviously when you're dealing with a data partner, with a digital partner, it's always a part of that service level agreement when it comes to preserving data, making it accessible, confidentiality part of it, cloud storage versus local storage and stuff like that. So that becomes a part of the mix. But if you're really thinking about best practices within your organization, then there are specific IT guidelines, as Julie mentioned. So that's something that would need to be discussed between yourselves and your IT experts in the company.
Okay. We have one more question and got a minute left. we might go a little over, but does the TLC need to be present on the case label of the goods? I think this was a question for you, Hank.
The TLC in general, it is on the case if the case is if the case is a lot. So depending on what is the definition of a lot. So if a case is coming from a specific lot, then the TLC would be on the case. The TLC could be on a specific item, it could be on the case. But as long as the identification itself is a reflection of where the product is coming from, and and so that the next constituent, the next component of your of the supply chain is able to take that data somehow, read that data, let's call it somehow for now, and then propagate that data. So if you are delivering products in cases to a specific to the next level of your supply chain, let's call it your distribution center, for example. Then if it's by case, then if that case is coming from a specific lot, then yes, that would be a good practice. But if you have different products from different lots within a case, then you might want to segregate those and identify TLCs for each, or identify one TLC that links to the other TLCs in the previous sectors when there is commingling and stuff like that. So there is no one size fit all in this, but it's usually a practice for the label to be on a reflection and definitely a true representation of the lot it's coming from.
Yeah, and I just do one more plug for the FDA. They have a really nice, and it's newer this summer, traceability lot code landing page that covers what Hank just talked about. So
yes.
For the person asking the question, check out that FDA resource.
Well, we've come up to the end or conclusion of today's event. I want to thank Hank, Jennifer, Max, and Julie for your participation, the input, and pulling this information together and collaborating together on this program. It was great. A lot of work went into it. I also want to thank SGS and Trustwell for their support in making this webinar possible. It certainly appears that FSMA 204 is going to be a journey, a fairly long one, and one of the takeaways I got from this is that it is a team effort, and that was really quite interesting. I just wanted to mention that both Julie and Jennifer are speaking at the Food Safety Consortium in October. It starts October 20th. It goes to the 22nd at the Food Safety Consortium in Washington, D.C. I'd encourage anybody who is on the call to attend. We have actually 6 FSMA 204 presentations in a matter of 2 days. So it will be helpful for everyone. They can certainly use a discount code called RICKYB, RACKYB, and get a $200 discount off of registration. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, our speakers, and of course our attendees for joining us. This was a recorded webinar. Everyone on the call will get a copy or a link to the archive recorded webinar. And again, I appreciate everyone's investing their time and spending their time with us. And I look forward to seeing everyone on the next event. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, great Labor Day weekend, and I hope to see everyone soon. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.